How are we all doing? All right. Well, my name's Micah. As most of you know, I got my local license last week, so I'm just really excited to be here. If you hear any heckling, that's just my Uncle Ted. Pay him no mind. He promised me he would say some things to throw me off, so I'll be ready for that. So the last couple weeks of school, I wrote a paper for financial management, and the professor really likes to relate the Bible to finances and show how there's money in most stories, and even things you might not think there's money, she'll say, well, look at it this way. And so one of the things she went over was the servant with the talents. And so, there were the master, and then you had the three servants who each got 10 talents, 5 and 2. And so they each did different things with their talents, and the one that only had 2 talents hid the money because he was afraid. And he was called a wicked and lazy servant, which I always felt was a little harsh. But things like that. And then one passage that really stood out to me was Luke chapter 3, verses 7 through 14, which we will go over later for some context for my story. But it's basically about John speaking with a crowd of soldiers, tax collectors, and just the Jews, and how they're living as they probably shouldn't be. And they think that they're right, and he lets them know that they're not. So when I first started writing this paper, we did discuss that Luke chapter 3 in class. And so me being a procrastinator and not being the most smart person, I started writing it on that. And I started making my paper on that, and I thought, this is going great. And then I talked to her after I'd already written the whole rough draft. I had everything filled out, and she said, you were assigned something else. So not wanting to restart everything, because I had a day to finish the paper, I found a way to connect it to what I was assigned, which is Zacchaeus, and that's in Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10, which we will also go over. And I found a way to connect those two and provide greater context. And the paper, when I was writing it over chapter 3, it just kind of spoke to me. I'm not really sure why. I couldn't tell you. But a lot of things, I would just reread it, and I would think, oh, this would be good there. And I would keep filling it out, and I'd reread it, and I'd go back over it. And it just clicked. I couldn't tell you what it was, but it was something special. And when I was writing it, I didn't think it would be a sermon. I didn't think it'd be my first sermon, that's for sure. But I really didn't think anything of it. I just thought it was a cool paper. But I think it makes perfect sense now that I've finally stopped running from what I believe I've been called to. And there are themes in the story that spoke to me directly about fulfillment. And I'm excited to share with you what I have learned. Father, be with us today. Help me speak your word and speak through me, and help the ears of the people here be receptive. And I just want to thank you for today and bless the sermon. Amen. So, I'll be talking over Zacchaeus. If you all remember the, the Sunday school song about a wee little man, that's the same one. That's the guy. And so Zacchaeus was a tax collector. He was actually a chief tax collector, which is top dog. He was a very wealthy man. It would be like a millionaire today, like Jeff Bezos or what have you. And tax collectors are known to be hated by most people in those times. So during that time, Rome was in rule, and so they wanted taxes. And so what they would do is they would get Jews to go and collect their taxes for them. And they'd say, hey, anything you take on top of what we owe, you can just keep. And so it became very easily, you can imagine, for tax collectors to get a little greedy and take more than they were supposed to. And so that's how they made their money. They would basically frame it as Rome needs all of this, when in reality they only needed half or whatever. And so they would take money from people, and people knew that they were getting robbed. So they were not very popular people. And so they were known to be very selfish, and they were seen as sinners and thieves and just the worst of the worst. And so this made it very easy for tax collectors to abuse the system. It speaks to the kind of man Zacchaeus was. You can't be a chief tax collector without being the greedy of the greedy. And he liked money. It was something that was really important to him. It was kind of the forefront of his mind. And if he could get more money, he was happy. And that's kind of what he lived for. But it's shown through the scriptures and the stories that his salvation is evidence in his financial dealings and his turn to financial justice and his transformation through Jesus. The first passage we're going to look at is in your Bibles, Luke chapter 3, verses 7 through 14, and it should be on the screen. John says to the crowds coming out to be baptized by him, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath? Produce fruit in keeping with repentance, and do not begin to say to yourselves, 'We have Abraham as our father.' For I tell you that out of these stones God can raise up children for Abraham. The axe is already at the root of the tree, and every tree that does not produce good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire." "What should we do then?" the crowd asked. John answered, "Anyone who has 2 shirts should share with the one who has none, and anyone who has food should do the same." Even tax collectors came to be baptized. "Teacher," they asked, "what should we do?" "Don't collect any more than you are required to," he told them. Then some soldiers asked him, "And what should we do?" He replied, "Do not extort money, and do not accuse people falsely. Be content with your pay." Sorry. So John is basically telling them that, your character shows in how you treat your money. It's really easy to be greedy, and it's really easy to, he told the Jewish people, share with people that don't have any. It's really easy, as kids, when you have a toy and another kid comes by, "I want to play with that truck," and you say, that's mine. And he's telling you, you gotta share. There are people who are less fortunate, and Jesus is calling you to get rid of that selfishness. So he talks to the 3 specific groups in that passage: the Jews, the Roman soldiers, and the tax collectors, and what they're doing wrong. However, I find interesting what he says that each group can be applied to everybody. Sharing what you have more than can be applied to anyone. Being truthful with your financial dealings, that's true with anybody. And don't extort people, don't lie. Those are just common good things that we should be following. The reason he says this, the underlying message, and what he's really trying to get at, is to stop being so selfish. A lot of times in human nature, it's really easy to just, that greed that you may not even think you have, it's just right under the skin. And that's just who we are. It was just really easy to fall and succumb to that. So he tells them possessions should be shared. Do not extort money, falsely accuse. Be content. That's something that we struggle with. Just be happy with what you have, and find peace in that. And then, the tax collectors specifically, be honest with their money, and don't extort. And all of these things he tells them are to stop being selfish in nature. Why is John mad at the crowd? Well, he's mad because he's the mouthpiece right before Jesus. So he's kind of getting them ready, like, hey, Messiah's coming. You guys got to get your act together, because he's not going to like what you're doing. And so, he calls them a brood of vipers. That word specifically is very interesting because a viper is a venomous, nasty snake. He didn't just call them, "You hooligans," or "You roughhousers." He called them a brood of vipers. I mean, that's that's not something to be taken lightly. And you can very clearly angry at the crowd. The axe is already at the root of the tree. He's saying, the time's coming. You guys got to get your stuff together, because this is not what you've been called to do. He's condemning them for their actions and is outraged by their self-righteousness. The people in the crowd have been acting as if they were right with God due to their social status and family heritage. They say, "Oh, we're the sons of Abraham." Or, "Well, I'm following all these rules, so I'm right, and I don't have to worry about anything." John tells them specifically, "And do not begin to say to yourselves, 'We have Abraham as our father.' For I tell you that out of these stones God can raise up children for Abraham." He's saying, you guys aren't special. And God promised Abraham as many grains of sand as children. So you're a dime a dozen. You guys aren't, just because you were Abraham's kid does not mean that you're just immediately right with God. He's saying none of that matters. It's by your person's actions and character that they will be judged. It's also something of note that the three groups were spoken about money. Money is oftentimes the last thing that we want to trust to God. Money is very quickly something that we get really, really possessive of. If you're given a bonus or you have money and someone, "Oh, could you pay for my meal?" "Well, I think you can pay for yourself. I don't really want to. That's my money." It's just something that we've, as humans, have always struggled with. I mean, you think of Cain and Abel. Money at the time obviously wasn't dollars and pennies, but you would look at the context of the time, so money would be livestock and land and possessions. And I'm sure you all know the story. Cain didn't want to give up his food. Abel was like, here's the best. And Cain was like, you are showing me up. And so he killed him. A little bit of a drastic measure, but, that's what happened. He became resentful, and he was like, I don't want to give this up. And my brother has no problem with it, and that makes me look bad. So, money represents character. It's something that it represents something in us that other things don't. It's just money does this because, when you have money, you have status, you have wealth, you have freedom to do whatever you want. You take pride in your money. You feel better than other people. There's competition to make more money than other people. Fame, everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people want to be famous and have the spotlight. Desire, anything you desire, drop the hat, you can just get it. Greed, Scrooge McDuck, that old story. He had, swimming pools of money, but he's the epitome of greed. He wanted more and more. He didn't want to give anybody anything. John's message is a wake-up call. They're all thinking, I'm living by the laws, I'm fine, I'm chilling. And he tells them, no, this is not what you're supposed to be doing. It's by your actions, by your character. If they stayed on the current course, he says that they will surely die. This is all preparation before Jesus comes to get the Jews ready. He's telling them their social status is not what needs to be changed, but their character. Now, John was baptizing in the Jordan River, and so Jesus entered Jericho. There should be a map, but basically, the Jordan River was very close to where Jesus entered Jericho. It's not very far away, as you can see. So that little blue part on the right, and then Jericho, that's where they were. And so it was very likely that Zacchaeus was with John when he was talking to the crowds, which makes perfect sense for when you read the passage about Zacchaeus and to see his change of heart. So the second passage we'll look at is Luke 19, 1 through 10. It should be in your Bibles and on the screen. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him. Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to murmur. Has he gone to be the guest of a sinner? But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, Today's salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Now that's a pretty drastic change, going from being a chief tax collector to giving immediately half of everything you own and anything you've cheated 4 times the amount. I mean, that's a radical change. That's just something that doesn't happen. So Zacchaeus was a man of status. Money was very important to him. And so in Luke 19, you see that he's very excited to meet Jesus. He's really wanting to. He's short, so he climbs into a fig tree. And so at this time, Jesus had been gaining popularity with the masses. People started to acknowledge him as the Messiah. And as he was walking through, Zacchaeus knew that Jesus was there, and he really wanted to see him. And so geographically, it was very likely that Zacchaeus was in the crowd John spoke to. It was very likely that he heard how he needed to change, how he needed to be honest with his financial earnings, and how he needed to not cheat people out of money, and how he needed to respect others and give to those who don't have any. This is a strong indication that Zacchaeus was very dishonest and became rich off of stealing tax money from a lot of people. So now the fruition of John, what he was prophesying, is here. Jesus is here, and he's come to save the world. And Zacchaeus, oh man, I've been not doing too great. I should probably get my act together. So Zacchaeus, because he replied, I will give half of everything I own, and 4 times the amount. Can you imagine you say you got rich in an unsavory way, and you had $1 million. I don't think it was that funny, but you had $1 million, and you just gave away $500,000. And then any person that you ever took money from, you'd give 4 times the amount. I mean, you wouldn't have any money left. You would be in debt to those people. And I think that's kind of the point he's trying to make, is that he's in debt to these people that he robbed. He's trying to make right. It's not so much that he's like, oh, I'm sorry, here's a gift card. He's actively giving back and going the extra mile to show that he's wronged these people. Because of this, Jesus says, this man too is a son of Abraham. He's not saying that Zacchaeus is a blood relative. He's not saying that because most people were children of Abraham, because everyone says Abraham our father. He's saying that his actions are speaking to God's heart. He's a man after his own heart, like David. He's talking about his actions and his character, and he's saying that this man is doing what I'm calling you to do. He's changing. He's being, what's the word? An activist for compassion and peace. He's transformed by making right all that he had wronged. And it was further transformed by being faithful to God. And as you walk in that journey and you're more faithful, it brings more life. And it's shown through your life. And faith is shown through your works in your life, not words. Everybody, the common saying is actions are more than words. Anybody can say anything, but it takes a lot more guts and a lot more meaning to do what you say. I could say that I'm a millionaire. We all know that I'm not a millionaire. Words are easy. Words are, they're cheap and they come effortlessly. There's some people that can have a silver tongue and they can talk their way out of anything. But, putting your money where your mouth is and showing those actions, that takes a different kind of level of commitment. Zacchaeus literally put his money where his mouth is. There's something special when you do good things for people. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but there can be a time when someone asks you to help them move. You don't get anything out of it. You don't get any money. You don't get any, it's not your house. But there's something special when a friend calls a favor and you do it because you care about them. There's no material gain. They may say thank you, but it's more you feel it in your heart that I did a good thing. And I'm happy that I helped my friend because they're better now because of me, and that's something that I could provide to them. I think that's special. I think you get a special fulfillment in your life that you would not have gotten otherwise. There's a special, fulfillment is a funny word because it can really depend on what you're doing. So for me, I've always struggled with purpose. I've not known what I want to do with my life. But with this right now, I feel a fulfillment that makes me excited, makes me happy. I feel like this is what I'm supposed to do. When Zacchaeus was called to give his fortune, you would think someone who's a chief tax collector would be like, what's the rich man who approached Jesus? He said, I want to follow you. And he said, give up everything. And he left because he didn't want to do it. And Zacchaeus was just as rich. And he, before Jesus said anything, gave away everything. And I can only imagine the fulfillment that he got. Even if the thing that was most important to him was money, he gave it away and he got this sense of fulfillment and he felt touched by God. And there was some transformation in his life. When I wrote this now sermon, but when I wrote their paper, I didn't really think anything of it. But now that I've kind of accepted this call and I look at things differently, I see, I see the reason why some things in this paper stood out to me, the fulfillment. That's something I always struggled with. And it immediately just clicked like, oh, it may not look like what he's doing makes sense, but there's a deeper level of fulfillment that he's receiving from doing this. And all these little things in my life and in this paper just started clicking, and I wasn't really sure why. I used to be terrified of public speaking. I could not, for the life of me, I couldn't do it. My hands would get clammy. I'd kind of look at the ground, my hands were in my pockets. But 2 years ago, it just clicked, and I could just, I'd be nervous before it happened, and I'd get up here, and I feel right at home. It doesn't scare me. And that there's something special about that with the plans that, God may have for you, things that may happen, you may not understand. It may not make any sense why you feel this overwhelming ease of talking in front of people, or Zacchaeus feeling this desire to give away all of his money. That would make no sense. I'm sure if you asked him a year before that, "Are you crazy? I'm not giving my money away." But once this happens, it's the only thing that makes sense. When John was talking to them, he's challenging us. Challenging us is something I find interesting, because you can't be challenged if it's something easy. If I ask my dad to play disc golf with me and beat me on a course, that's not challenging for him because it's something he can do. But if I ask my dad to give me $1 million, I keep using money, but if I ask him to give me that money, that's hard for him. He doesn't have $1 million. He doesn't know where he's going to come up with that. There's something about challenging us that when someone challenges you, they know that it's not something you can easily do, but they're asking it of you anyways. John is challenging this crowd because if everybody could just be like Jesus, we would all be doing it already. It's not something that easily comes to us. It's not something that we can just do. It's something we need help with. It's something that we need pushed. For example, when I'm in the gym by myself, I like to lift. When I'm by myself, it's all right. But when I have a partner who's pushing me, "Oh, you can do one more. Come on, you got it in you," or challenging me to do this weight that I might think is really hard, when I have someone in my corner challenging me, pushing me, it makes a world of difference. You feel that, I don't know, that like burning in your insides. That's funny. But he was challenging us. He knows that, to be like Jesus is not something that's easy. Stop being selfish. That's not something that we can just do. It's really easy to, get money and you think, well, this is mine and I'm not giving it to anybody. But that's why it's so important and impactful that he's calling us to stop doing that and to get ready for Jesus, because when he comes, you better be ready. Jesus came to seek and save the lost. Zacchaeus is a perfect example. He's someone who's far gone. He's a chief tax collector. You know the story. And in Luke 3, that's great context, because everything that Zacchaeus does in 19, it's what John told him to do in chapter 3. I mean, it's a linear connection. We see John challenges these people. They're like, "What should we do?" And then when you see him again, he's telling Jesus, "Look what I've done. I've done these things that I've been called to do." It's above and beyond what any normal person would do. And I think that's because his encounter with Jesus was transformative. When you see people in the Bible and you read the stories of them encountering Jesus, like the lepers, or anybody who encounter him and then they're healed and then they're like, "Who's that guy?" Or, the cripple who couldn't walk and he just speaks into them, or a blind person. I mean, there's countless stories. And you see that radical change. They're completely different afterwards, and they're not going to be the same. And so Zacchaeus' transformation through Jesus is shown in his finances. It may be shown differently in our lives. It may be shown me being good at not being afraid of public speaking. It may be shown, I don't know. But, it doesn't have to be with money. It's just the reason it's so important for this story is because money was the forefront of his mind. It's so important because money was all he cared about. It's not just because everyone needs to be caring with their money. It's because Zacchaeus was money. He was greed. You're not going to get Zacchaeus without being greed. You can't be a chief tax collector without that desire for money. So the reason that's so important is because he gives it all away and is indebted to anyone he's ever wronged. I mean, you can't get more of a radical, polar opposite change. There's just nothing else. So with the money being the focal point of his life, turning around and doing what he did, that's just, it's radical. He was transformed through his financial dealings. Zacchaeus, like most people in his day, lived for the law. So, the law of the laws in the old times, you had the Ten Commandments and all the rules and all the laws that Moses gave, and everybody lived by those. And they thought, well, if I follow all these 200-some rules, I'll be good. And there was no compassion for people. It was just, you're concerned about doing what's right, quote unquote. And as long as you follow the rules, you're okay. But when Jesus came, it's not about the rules. It's about having compassion. And before his encounter with Jesus, he had no compassion. He was a tax collector. He liked taking money from people. He had no problem with it. But with this change, he grew compassion and wanted to give back to those people that he wronged. Jesus provided a path to redemption through his finances, and it's shown through his journey because of the radical change. What does this mean for us? So although money is still a great example, it's not necessarily what we need to concern ourselves with. It's more about what we ourselves use as that vice today. What do we use to be greedy and selfish? How do we deny other people compassion? How do we rob them of joy? How do we act inhumane? What is something that we can't let go of, that it eats at us and we become nasty? Something that we're protective of. If a little kid has a truck, you try and touch it, he might smack you on the head. He'll lash out. That's his. He doesn't want you to touch it. That's his. He's not giving it to you. What is that for us today that we see that it doesn't matter who comes near it, as soon as you come near it, be careful. That's really what this passage is calling us to do. And that may be money for some of us. That may be the point where we have money and we don't want to give it, but there's also a lot of people who are very giving with their money, and that's not something that they're greedy with. You have to look inward to see what you yourself use as that vice. Zacchaeus becoming a defender of economic justice is an important example of how Christ followers should be living today. Living for your fellow man, living for justice and helping others. We're called to love each other and not rob and be selfish. We're called to be giving. And John says, if someone has something and you have more than you need, give. Don't hoard it. Be honest with your finances. Don't extort people or falsely accuse. One of the things that just grinds my gears is falsely accusing people. I can't think of something more stupid, because they didn't do it, and you're making them out to be the bad guy. Sorry. But a great step towards being a giving, selfless person starts with money and how you treat others, because if you can learn to be selfless with your money, I think you can do just about anything. A lot of people already can be that, but that is, I find, probably the hardest thing for us to do, is to be okay and willing to be giving with our money. Because like I said, money is power, it's fame, it's freedom. People want freedom. It's status, it's competition, it's greed, it's wealth, it's everything you could ever want. And in today's world, if you have money, you can do anything. You can be anything you want to be. You can have as much freedom as you want. You can be as secure as you want. People like security. They don't want to feel threatened. They don't want to feel uneasy. Security's comforting. And so money's comforting. And so if we can start there, and if you can learn to be selfless with your money, I think you can do just about anything. The intent behind the treatment of finances is what makes this such an important topic. People feel entitled to what they have. And when Jesus says to Zacchaeus, salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham, he's pointing out that radical shift in his heart and his mind, that radical change, that character development that he didn't have. God wants this radical shift in our lives, in whatever avenue that may be. They need to be, Christ's followers need to be examples and to lead others in the right direction. Again, it's not the money, it's what the money represents. It's what we treat that as. Even if you're not called to, even if you don't know what you're called to be, you should still care for, that other person on the street, be the Good Samaritan. You should still be helping others. That's just what we're called to do, and that's what Jesus wants us to be, is to love others. I mean, that's his greatest commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. Zacchaeus, he had a radical shift through his interaction with Christ. He's a great example of how we should live our lives today. And again, I don't expect anybody to do that radical, but that's why he's the example. That's why John is challenging us. Because when you set a goal and a challenge that's hard to attain, it makes you push for it. If the challenge is just, give away some money, you can do that on a Tuesday. That doesn't matter. But if it's a goal that is something that's so radical, it's like, I can't fathom ever being able to do that. That's what makes you push to reach that. That's what makes you try harder. That's what makes you feel this burn to do better. That's why you're called to be better. Listening to what John says, he warns the crowd of their wrongdoing, of living selfishly, of stealing, and being untruthful. The crowd was holier than thou and did not share their belongings with the less fortunate. The soldiers were not content with their pay, and they extorted people. There's stories all throughout time of soldiers beating people or getting what they want, or just being, above the law because they were the law, so they felt entitled to do whatever they want. And lastly, the tax collectors were simply dishonest. They were stealing from people. They took what they wanted, and no one could stop them. The connection of these groups and how Zacchaeus was living is one and the same. But through Christ, he was able to listen to John's teachings and repent. He knew what he was doing was wrong. From a sinner who took pride in stealing from others to giving away most of his estate to the less fortunate, Zacchaeus is an example of how the church should be living. He also shows us that no matter who you are, salvation and redemption are never too far gone. If someone as wicked as a chief tax collector can be welcomed and accepted by Jesus, then there's hope for us all. I'd like to call my dad back up to end us in prayer as we get ready to worship.